The first sign was a shadow on the long-range sensors. The fleet master of the SCI-FI Dominion, Supreme Strategist Korvac, studied the readings with narrowed eyes. The void of space beyond the Veil Nebula had been silent for centuries. No ships. No signals. No life. Yet now something stirred. "Report," he commanded. His second-in-command, Sub-Warlord Xyrock, hesitated before answering. "It appears to be a fleet, my lord. Their numbers are unclear. They distort our sensors." "A fleet?" Korvac sneered. "Who would dare encroach upon Dominion space?" Xyrock hesitated again, his thick reptilian fingers tightening around the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "The origin is unknown. But the signature is unlike any we've ever recorded." Korvac leaned forward. "Display it." The holographic projection shimmered to life before him. At first there was nothing but static interference. Then the image resolved, a grainy silhouette of a formation moving through the void. The ships were dark, angular, almost predatory in design. No transmissions. No heraldry. Silent. Korvac frowned. There was something unsettling about them, something that gnawed at his warrior instincts. "Order the forward scouts to investigate," he growled. Xyrock didn't move. The warlord's patience thinned. "I gave an order, Sub-Warlord." "My lord." Xyrock swallowed. "The scouts already went ahead." Korvac's eyes narrowed. "And?" Xyrock exhaled. "They did not return." A ripple of unease spread through the command deck. Korvac clenched his jaw, suppressing his irritation. "Then we send warships." This time, there was a beat of silence before Xyrock spoke again. "We did, my lord." Korvac turned to face him fully. "And?" Xyrock's voice was grim. "They did not return either." A hush fell over the command deck. The ghost return. For centuries there had been whispers. Tales of creatures that once walked the stars, who burned whole empires to dust and then vanished. The oldest among the SCI-FI had spoken of them in hushed voices, warnings passed down through the generations. Ghosts they called them. Shadows of an extinct race. But that was all they were, myths. Until now. Korvac clenched his fists. "If they refuse to communicate, then they will die." He turned to his officers. "Mobilize the fleet. We meet these ghosts head-on." The SCI-FI Dominion was not known for retreating. Their fleets had conquered worlds, their armies had broken empires. They would not be cowed by phantoms. The command deck burst into motion, officers relaying orders, ships forming into battle formations. In moments, an armada of warships surged forward, heading toward the encroaching fleet. As they closed the distance, the sensors adjusted, finally revealing the enemy fleet in full clarity. And what they saw froze them all. A forgotten nightmare awakens. It was not a single fleet. It was an armada. Hundreds of ships, each larger than the last, each bristling with weapons and technology the SCI-FI could not comprehend. The hulls were dark, matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The vessels moved with eerie precision, as if controlled by a single, unseen mind. But that was not what sent a chill through the warlords. It was the symbol. A faded insignia etched onto the prow of the largest warship. Two crossed blades over a blue sphere. A long-forgotten emblem that had once struck terror into the hearts of civilizations across the galaxy. Xyrock took an involuntary step back. "It cannot be." Korvac's blood ran cold as recognition struck. "The Terran Imperium," he whispered. "They were supposed to be extinct. Their worlds had burned in wars long past, their people scattered to the void. Yet here they were. And they were coming. A war decided before it began. The SCI-FI fleet braced for battle, forming their strongest defensive lines. But it didn't matter. The human fleet did not slow. They did not send warnings. They did not negotiate. The first Terran warship opened fire. A single beam of energy lanced across the void, slicing through the SCI-FI flagship like paper. The once proud battleship detonated in a brilliant fireball, its debris scattering across the battlefield. Then the rest of the Terran fleet followed. What happened next was not a battle. It was an extermination. Within minutes, the Dominion's finest warships were reduced to burning wrecks. The SCI-FI had numbers, but it was meaningless. The humans fought like predators, fast, precise, merciless. Korvac watched in stunned horror as his fleet was torn apart. This is impossible," he muttered. But deep down he knew the truth. This war had been decided before it even began. The ghosts had returned. And nothing in the galaxy could stop them. Korvac gripped the edges of his command throne, his claws digging into the reinforced metal. His mind, trained for war, refused to accept what his eyes witnessed. The SCI-FI Dominion's greatest fleet, hundreds of warships forged over centuries of conquest, was being torn apart like scrap metal. The Terrans moved with surgical precision. Their ships darted through the chaos, weapons lancing out with pinpoint accuracy. SCI-FI warships, massive and heavily armored, crumbled under the onslaught, their defenses shredded as if they were nothing more than training drones. Korvac forced himself to think. He was supreme strategist of the Dominion. He would not let fear dictate his next move. Pull back the second wave, he barked. Reform the battle lines. We need a counteroffensive. But even as his officers scrambled to comply, Korvac knew it was futile. The humans were not fighting a battle. They were executing an ancient sentence. A ghostly voice echoed in his mind, the warnings of the elders, the old myths he had dismissed as superstition. Beware the Terrans. Should they ever return, the stars will weep. He had laughed at such stories. Now he was living their nightmare. Desperation in the void. The surviving SCI-FI warships attempted to fall back, breaking formation in a desperate bid to escape. But the Terrans had anticipated this. A new wave of human vessels emerged from the darkness, smaller, faster craft that darted like predatory insects. Their weapons were different, not the massive lances that had obliterated the Dominion's front line. Instead, these ships launched something far worse. nanite warheads. The first warhead detonated near the retreating Dominion battleships. The explosion was small, barely registering on the sensor grid. Then the screaming began. Korvac watched in horror as the ship it struck withered. Its hull darkened, corroding before his eyes. The ship's structure collapsed, its surface eaten away by an invisible force. Within moments, the mighty battleship was gone, devoured from the inside out, its crew dead before they could even scream. More detonations followed. Ship after ship dissolved into nothing. The nanites spread like wildfire, consuming anything they touched. Some Dominion captains, realizing the horror that awaited them, chose to overload their reactors and die in a final blaze rather than be unmade. Korvac's throat tightened. This isn't war. This is extermination. He turned to Xyrock, whose scales had paled in shock. Get us out of here. Xyrock hesitated. But my lord, the fleet? The fleet is gone. Korvac roared. Send the retreat signal. Now. Xyrock obeyed, issuing the recall order. Across the battlefield, the few surviving SCI-FI vessels turned tail, their once proud warriors now desperate to escape the void-born reapers. Korvac exhaled sharply, watching the burning wreckage of his fleet. He had never known defeat like this. Never felt this kind of fear. But they were alive. They would regroup. They would warn the Dominion. Or so he thought. A message from the dead. Just as the Exarch's Wrath, Korvac's personal warship, prepared to jump into hyperspace, every screen on the bridge flickered. The usual battle reports vanished, replaced by a single line of text. A transmission. Not Dominion language. Not SCI-FI script. It was human. A deep, ancient voice rumbled through the ship, filling the command deck with chilling finality. We told you never to return. Then the ship's lights died. Every system on the Exarch's Wrath went dark. Power cores failed. Weapons shut down. The mighty warship floated, dead in the void. Korvac's stomach twisted. Then he saw them. More human ships emerging from the darkness. Not warships. Something else. They were enormous. Not sleek like the Terran battlecruisers, but massive, hulking constructs of steel and shadow. They bore no visible weapons, no insignia. Just silent, watching giants. And then, one of them opened. A massive bay, deep and cavernous, spread like a maw. A gravitational field seized the Exarch's Wrath, pulling it toward the waiting abyss. Korvac's command crew panicked. My lord. We are caught in their field. Engines are unresponsive. Shields are collapsing. Xyrock turned to him, desperation in his voice. What do we do? Korvac could only watch as his warship, his legacy, was consumed by the abyss. And in his heart he knew. The humans were taking him somewhere. Somewhere worse than death. Korvac's warship, the Exarch's Wrath, drifted helplessly into the yawning bay of the human vessel. The massive Terran construct swallowed them whole, sealing the entrance behind them like a predator closing its jaws around its prey. Silence fell over the bridge. Dim red emergency lights flickered to life as the ship's systems remained lifeless. Korvac could hear his own breathing, shallow, controlled, masking the terror clawing at his chest. Xyrock trembled at his side. The rest of the bridge crew were frozen in their seats, waiting to die. And then the screens flickered again. A single word appeared in stark Terran script. Disembark. Korvac exhaled slowly. They want us alive, he muttered. Xyrock turned his head, his throat membranes trembling. That doesn't mean they won't kill us later. Korvac gave no response. He merely stood, adjusting the folds of his war cloak, and motioned for the bridge crew to follow. Whatever fate awaited them, they would face it as warriors, not cowering beasts. As the bulkhead doors hissed open, a terrible thought crawled into his mind. What if the myths weren't just about war? What if the humans were never gods of destruction, but something far worse? Welcome to the void. The docking bay of the Terran ship was an expanse of shadow and steel. Towering support beams stretched into a darkness that seemed to have no end, as if the entire chamber was a gateway into nothingness. There were no humans in sight. Just silence. The air was thick, heavy with something unseen yet oppressive. Every Jati warrior that stepped out of the Exarch's wrath felt it immediately, an unnatural presence, like a predator watching from the void itself. A deep hum resonated through the structure, neither mechanical nor organic. A sound that was ancient. Korvac's throat tightened. This place, it isn't just a warship. Xyrock's voice was barely a whisper. It's something else. They moved forward, their talons clicking softly against the floor. The metal beneath their feet was smooth, flawless, too perfect as if it had never been touched by the imperfections of time. A door loomed ahead. Then it opened on its own. Beyond it was a single chamber. And inside, a human. The last warning. The figure stood tall, clad in black and silver armor that gleamed even in the dim lighting. His face was exposed, a creature of pale skin and cold, unreadable eyes. He did not carry a weapon. He didn't need one. Korvac had been a warrior for centuries. He had fought 1,000 battles, crushed rebellions, led the Dominion's conquests across the void. But as he stood before this single Terran, he felt something he had never known before. Inferiority. The human spoke, his voice calm. You should not have come here. His words were not a threat, not a boast. They were a statement of fact. Korvac forced himself to respond. We did not know your kind still lived. The human tilted his head slightly. And yet, the myths warned you. Korvac had no answer. The Terran's gaze darkened. Your dominion, your so-called empire, believed itself supreme. It spread across the stars, devouring worlds, enslaving the weak, toppling civilizations. You thought yourselves invincible. The human took a step forward. And now you've learned the truth. Xyrock inhaled sharply, his scales rippling with barely contained fear. Korvac stood his ground. What do you intend to do with us? The human studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke a single sentence that sent ice through Korvac's veins. We intend to let you go. The bridge crew stirred in confusion. Even Xyrock blinked in disbelief. Korvac narrowed his eyes. Why? The Terran's expression remained unreadable. Because we do not need to kill you. The walls around them seemed to shift. Screens activated, memories flashing across them, images of battles long before Korvac's time. Jati warships burning. Entire Dominion homeworlds turned to dust. And one last battle, a battlefield that stretched across a dozen systems, where the Dominion had tried to fight the humans once before. The final transmission of that ancient war played. A Jati voice. Desperate. Screaming. We were wrong. The humans, they are not mortals. They are not. Static. The recording ended. The human leaned forward slightly. You will return to your Dominion, he said. You will tell them what happened here. You will tell them that we have returned. Korvac felt a cold realization creeping into his bones. You want them to know, he murmured. The human nodded once. And they will make a choice. To leave us alone. His eyes darkened. Or to repeat history. Korvac understood the meaning beneath those words. There would be no war. Only annihilation. The human stepped aside, gesturing toward the docking bay. You are free to leave. Korvac hesitated only for a moment before turning sharply on his heel. We're leaving, he commanded his crew. They obeyed, moving quickly toward the ship. No one dared look back. But Korvac knew. The Dominion would never let this go. And that meant only one thing. The myths would become reality once more. Korvac had barely spoken a word since their return. The Exarch's wrath soared through the void, heading toward Dominion space at full speed, but silence gripped the crew like a noose. They had seen too much. The Terrans had let them go. Not out of mercy. Not out of weakness. But out of certainty. The certainty that their return was inevitable. The certainty that no force in the galaxy could stop them. And Korvac knew. The Dominion would not take the warning. They would not believe. They would fight. And the last war, the one buried in myths and whispers, would happen again. The Emperor laughs in ignorance. The Dominion core worlds loomed ahead, vast cities stretching over the surfaces of a dozen planets, illuminated by golden banners bearing the sigil of the High Emperor. As Korvac's vessel docked in the Grand Imperial Station, a sea of officials, warriors, and dignitaries awaited them. Xyrock exhaled. They think we return victorious. Korvac stepped forward, his gaze cold. They will not think so for long. The High Emperor awaited them in his gilded chamber. Towering and adorned in ceremonial war armor, his presence was one of absolute arrogance. He leaned forward on his throne, clicking his talons against the armrest. You return, the Emperor mused. But you return alone. Korvac bowed his head slightly. We bring news of the humans. The chamber stilled. Then laughter. Deep guttural mocking. The assembled nobles and generals joined the Emperor in his amusement. The humans? He sneered. The ghosts of legend? The ones we supposedly fought long ago? Come now, Korvac, I expected better than childish fables. Korvac's jaw clenched. It is no fable. We found them. The Emperor leaned back, amusement still flickering in his gaze. And, did you crush them? No. The laughter stopped. Korvac's voice remained steady, but inside his blood burned. They took our fleet apart like toys. They let us go, not out of mercy but because they see no threat in us. We are nothing to them. Less than insects. The chamber was silent. Then the Emperor clicked his mandibles, eyes narrowing. And yet you stand here. Not dead. Not enslaved. Not erased. They want us to make a choice, Korvac said carefully. The Emperor's expression hardened. Then the choice is war. The Dominion's pride, and its funeral pyre. The Dominion war fleet launched within the week. Korvac stood on the bridge of his new command vessel, watching through the viewport as 10,000 ships surged forward, colossal dreadnoughts, swarming battlecruisers, entire fleets moving like a tidal wave of death. The largest force the Dominion had ever assembled. They would erase humanity. At least that was the plan. But Korvac knew the truth. They were marching toward annihilation. The humans had given them a chance. And the Dominion had spat on it. The fleet arrived in the dark void where the Terran warship had first revealed itself. Their weapons hummed, shields engaged, warriors prepared to rain death upon these upstart ghosts of legend. And then, the stars vanished. Not in the way a ship cloaked. Not in the way an eclipse dimmed a world. No, the light itself died. As if the universe had simply decided to no longer exist. The return of the gods of war. From that darkness they came. Titanic human warships, unlike anything seen before. Silent. Watching. Waiting. Their hulls swallowed the void, black as death, dwarfing even the Dominion's greatest dreadnoughts. Their very presence sent shudders through the fabric of reality. And then, the voice came. Not over comms. Not over signals. It spoke directly into their minds. You have chosen war. Korvac's heart turned to ice. You have chosen extinction. The first blast tore through the Dominion fleet like a god's wrath. It was not a weapon of lasers. Not kinetic rounds. It was something else. A beam of pure, unrelenting erasure. Dreadnoughts ceased to exist in an instant. One moment there. The next gone. Panic erupted. The Dominion opened fire. Every gun, every torpedo, every energy lance was unleashed in a desperate storm of destruction. Nothing landed. The human ships moved too fast, their black hulls phasing through the Dominion's fire as if reality itself bent to their will. And then they answered. Thousands of beams slashed through the void. Entire armadas crumbled in the span of a heartbeat. Korvac watched in horror as ships imploded, as dreadnoughts were shattered, as battlecruisers simply ceased to be. The pride of the Dominion, the greatest fleet in galactic history, was being wiped out like insects before a storm. The humans had been forgotten. But they had never left. And now they were purging. The final transmission. The Exarch's wrath burned. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the air. Xyrock stumbled forward, gripping Korvac's arm. We have to escape. But Korvac knew there was no escape. There had never been. He turned to the shattered comms array. And, with trembling claws, he activated the final transmission. The Dominion homeworld had to hear. They had to know. As flames consumed the bridge, as the last remnants of the Dominion's pride turned to ash, his voice cut through the void. We were fools. We were arrogant. We thought them myths. But the humans have returned. And we have sealed our fate. The last thing Korvac saw was the vast, impossible human warship moving forward. Silent, absolute, bringing an end to the war before it had even begun. Then the void took him. And the galaxy would never forget again. The age of man had returned. Fire subscribe for more epic sci-fi stories. Fire.